Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output and show you why we think they are remarkable. And in this case, those moments come from Brandenburg Concerto No. 1. We're in the middle of a mini-series, and we are now on to the final minuet. We've taken a look at the minuet proper, the refrain, the ritornello minuet section. This time we're going to look at two different trios, which are contrasting sections of this minuet. The oboe's a horn made of wood. I'd play you a tune if I could. But the reeds are a pain, and the fingering's insane. It's the ill wind that no one blows good. Delightful limerick from Ogden Nash. Oboe is the ill wind that no one blows good. It's true that the oboe is a finicky instrument, and the type of person who can play oboe is usually stereotyped as a fastidious, detail-oriented type. And there are reasons for that, and they stem from the mechanics of the instrument itself. It can, in fact, be played well, or blowed good, I guess. It's not always an ill wind. It can be a beautiful wind instrument. It can be played well. It just takes a little extra work. And for oboists, that extra work is making their own reeds, which is something that oboists do. It's not always the case for other woodwind instruments. So the oboe, and this is true of the baroque oboe and the modern version, is a double reed instrument, and you basically just play by blowing air in between two small flat reeds, and the reeds vibrate. That air column goes into the instrument itself, and then by placing your hands on different holes and keys that activate other holes, you create the different pitches. It is that simple in theory, but in practice it's extremely finicky, and most oboists will tell you all about the travails of playing the instrument, how much more finicky it is than, say, flute, which you don't have to worry about a reed. The angle at which you blow the air is important, but once you nail that, there's a lot less complicated things going on with the wood, because the flute is, you're not worried about wood, or at least the modern flutes, right, that are almost always made out of metal. So oboists are a special kind of person, is what I'm getting at. And it takes someone like the oboist in this delightful video in the Netherlands Bach Society, Katharina Verhaar. She talks all about the baroque oboe and its differences between that instrument and some of the Romantic era versions and then the modern versions. It's pretty fascinating, so if you are interested in more of the technical aspects of the discussion on oboes, we'll link to it in the episode description. Fastidious might be a word we could use to describe Bach, of course. We always talk about his complexity, and here in the Brandenburg No. 1 it's no different. He could have simply gone with the 3-movement structure that he does for the rest of the Brandenburgs, but here he adds on, as we mentioned last week, a sort of grand minuet with connecting movements, a rondo form in which the minuet appears 4 times. It's always minuet, something, minuet, something, minuet, something, minuet, something, minuet. So you get the minuet 4 times in a 7-movement mini structure. And that whole thing that I just said is considered to be movement 4 of Brandenburg 1. So you got 4 movements of Brandenburg 1. Now there are 6 Brandenburg concertos. And that's, I don't know what the math is on this, but the amount of music encapsulated by the Brandenburg concertos themselves is just infinitesimally small compared to the rest of Bach's output. So sometimes I just like to get some perspective there on how much music J.S. Bach actually wrote. Anyway, zooming back in here, let's look at, within the grand minuet, let's look at what happens right after the first minuet movement. What we have here is an instrumentation of 2 oboes and 1 bassoon. We already know that we have 3 oboes at our disposal here because Bach has used 3 separate oboe parts previously in this concerto. So here's a specific choice to have 2 oboes, which are soprano range instruments, so the highest of the family of oboes, and then the bassoon, which is a bass instrument. Now, a bassoon is also a double reed instrument. Christian, you have a little bit of experience with the bassoon, right?
I do. I used to play bassoon. I used to own a bassoon.
So this Brandenburg Concerto, you've got to talk about horn as well, and here we go. We have bassoon here too. Bach chooses to use just 2 soprano double reed instruments and 1 bass double reed instrument, and not use any of the middle range double reed instruments, which are now obsolete, but which were used in a lot of the rest of his works, and that is the oboe d'amore, which is basically an alto oboe with a lovelier sound, I guess you could say, a little less piercing. And then the oboe da caccia, which is the one that has the giant bell at the end of it. That's more of a tenor range instrument. But Christian, would you also say that the bassoon is not only suited to the bass range?
That's a good question. I mean, in this time period, it was 99% used as a bass instrument. I don't want to sell the bassoon short and say that it is not capable of higher playing like in a tenor range, because it is, but it wasn't used that way much until the time of about Haydn or Mozart, where you could actually see a separately written out bassoon part all the time, and it had some harmony and melody in there, and maybe some solo lines.
Right.
And then we could tell that the bassoon was an instrument that could actually go higher. But there is also a balance problem with the bassoon, which is that it's not that loud in the terms of the modern orchestra, even when it's playing low, but it's especially soft as it goes higher and higher into the soloistic register. So composers that use it high, the octave above middle C, those notes are weak in comparison to other instruments that could just cover it up. So you don't see it a lot. And in this case, in Bach's case, it was probably even worse because those instruments were a little less flexible. So it is nice to see this because you see a moment where he has called for the bass line to be played by one bassoon, and it's got some nice higher, it starts in a nice higher register, even though it is playing functionally a bass line still.
Yeah, Bach uses bassoon a lot, but he doesn't really feature it all that often, I would say, as compared to the other instruments. But if you want to hear a really good baroque bassoon feature composer, then you should be looking up Jan Zelenka, who is a baroque composer from Prague, and I think Vienna, maybe also lived in Vienna, I think. And he is known today for a couple of really interesting trio sonatas that are 2 oboes and bassoon, which is the same instrumentation as this, except it's a full sonata with sort of background instruments as well. But there's some great bassoon work in there.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also going to link that in the description. So here, Bach is giving us a contrasting movement to the minuet. So what was the minuet like? Well, it was cheery, mostly. Had a little bit of harmonic interest there at the beginning, like we mentioned last week, but was in a cheery F major most of the time, with interspersed horn calls. So here, the oboes and bassoon, which, continuing our metaphor from last week, these are the sort of town pipers. They get something more musically contrasting. We're getting a relative minor key of D minor here. We're getting a short little piece in binary form. This is called a trio, which is a little bit of a misnomer in this context because usually that's referring to the fact that it's the middle of 3 short sections in ternary form. But here, as we said, we have 7, where the minuet is that refrain. So now there are 2 trios. They act as numbers 2 and 6 to the 7, so it's all kind of confusing. It's easier if you just are looking at it on a page, but the point is that this is supposed to be contrasting. And it's not just contrasting because it's in D minor. It's also contrasting because it has a hollow and thin sound because it's only 3 instruments, and like we said, they're basically 2 soprano instruments and 1 bass/tenor-ish sounding instrument, the way Bach is using it here. And that's it. There's nothing else happening. There's no harpsichord, there's no strings. It's also just the nature of these instruments to sound a little bit more hollow than the warm sound that you get from strings. Clearly Bach is treating the two oboes as a group of voices together and then the bassoon as a separate bass line. If you listen to the oboes, they are typically in harmony with each other. My favorite part of this mini movement comes here when we get these longer tones from the oboes. They end this little mini phrase here with a pause. Just there. So that is not in the score. That's a interpretive choice by these players here, which I think is very cool. This whole recording by the Netherlands Bach Society is full of these little interpretive choices that involve tempo, but it's not so much tempo as it's like they're just taking these musical phrases and making them into true phrases. They feel like sentences. They feel like thoughts that are being expressed through music, and then they are separated by little pauses, which are not in the score, but which really add to the flavor of the piece. So then we get a second trio. That is, again, the sixth of these mini movements. So this is what we're actually hearing before the final minuet. So it should contrast with the very middle movement, which we have yet to talk about and which we will talk about next week. That's the Polonaise movement.
You know, Alex, it might be confusing just the word trio here, just in general.
That's true. Yeah, it doesn't mean three instruments, although it is.
Well, it
but it doesn't mean that.
Yeah, it's worth defining the term because you're probably thinking that trio just means three people playing, and that is essentially the correct definition. But the early Baroque composer Jean-Baptiste Lully was the one who came up with this idea where that a minuet might have a contrasting section, and the scoring of that section would be a trio of three people, of three instruments, and that would actually be two oboes and a bassoon. And so it's one of those annoying things, or fascinating things, I guess, about language, is that became the name of the section of the minuet. It became called trio, even though it no longer needs to be scored that way.
Yeah, but also, unlike a lot of times when languages do that, where something loses its original meaning, this time it actually, like the word trio, probably to most people who don't know that much about Baroque music, they actually know the right or original meaning still, right? That still prevailed.
Yeah, that's true. So the various extra meanings of trio are what's a little bit confusing, including like trio. You said trio sonata already, and that is three, but like a trio sonata might be for two violins, but then the third part is the bass line. So it's not what you might think of as three equal parts. They have,
right.
One of them has a different function. And then an organ trio sonata would be something like that, but for organ. And that's not three people, that's one person. It just means that there are three independent keyboards being used, two manuals with two different sounds and the pedal board.
Three voices, right.
Yeah.
Unless you think that a trio sonata would be simple then, because it's only three voices. Bach's trio sonatas are some of the hardest of his organ repertoire. Because those three voices are so distinct and independent from each other. But here, in our second trio, we have two horns and then one oboe. Or it's actually not one oboe, but it's three oboes playing in unison. So this is an orchestrational choice by Bach. He specifies this, and it's a smart one, and he knows that because oboes, especially Baroque oboes, don't have that much power compared to the horns, so he balances it in this way. Also, we already said the oboe was a soprano instrument, but he gives it basically the bass line function here, which is really fascinating to me. It's not really playing, much of the time it's not playing under the horns, although it sometimes does. They occupy kind of a similar range in this, although the horns definitely go lower because they're not really, I mean, would you call a horn a soprano instrument? A Baroque horn, it can hit those notes, but it can also go in the lower partials, it goes down farther, like we kind of talked about a few episodes ago when we focused on the horn.
Yeah, the modern horn in orchestrational terms is most suited for what we might call an alto range, lower half of the treble clef sounding.
Yeah.
But in the Baroque era, it sure is higher most of the time because of the same problem with trumpets where they did not have the in-between notes yet. So it's harder to play those notes up high because they're closer together. And the variation in lip and mouth pressure of the lip muscles is really hard to do. So it's not as common as melodic violin writing or oboe writing, but it is high a lot of the time. And the lower it gets, the more jumpy it gets.
And so this movement is contrasting again the other movement. This one's not D minor. This is a just jaunty F major again with these horn calls. This way it closes out the piece in a joyful manner. I mean, I think it would have been a little bit more of a downer if we had a long D minor movement as our second to last movement, because Bach knows he needs to use the F major minuet as the end. And the end isn't that long because he has to use the same thing he already used before. So we get, then, this happy horn tune.
These articulation markings on the quarter notes are in the manuscript too. I was surprised to see these little lines above the notes.
Yes. So my favorite part of this movement, it's probably this section when the oboes get this ascending fast line right here. But I still think the oboe bassoon stuff from earlier is really my favorite from these trio movements here. Can you do a good Australian accent?
I don't think so.
Because there's an amazing quote here from Steve Irwin. And that unusual squawking sound is actually the mating call of the rare... Oh, it's just an oboe player. It's really good.
So when you generally when you work with oboists, they will not want to articulate these low notes and they'll want to slur to them. What's happening here is an oboe is honkier in its the lower few notes, and if those notes are going to be tongued, like the player is going to go t and begin a note on there, that's hard, or the first note of a phrase. But if it's supposed to be slurred and smooth, and they can do it all in one breath and without re-tonguing the reed, then it's not so hard. But here they don't have that luxury. Here it needs to be almost like it's like quick. It's like machine gun fire. It's just da 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 da, and double tonguing for the 16th notes. And the oboes have to keep up with the horns, and the horns have an easier time tonguing that fast. As far as I know, from being a bassoonist, it's not that easy to double tongue on the bassoon, and to tongue really fast is possible and sounds okay, but three unison oboes playing all these tongued low notes is, as an orchestrator, that would make me sad.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't here because the Baroque oboe is much gentler in tone, and so it doesn't have that same problem. Plus, two horns with their own parts, even three oboes has trouble competing with that. It's amazing how that works. It takes three oboes in unison to compete with one horn.
Right, but then also Bach, the orchestrator, right? Like, even though those three oboes are needed to balance the horns, there is also the contrast of something like the Oboe d'Amour aria, which Bach did a lot of, and in those arias, it's usually just quieter strings under it, and that's a quieter instrument than even one oboe. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, he knew
something like in Vergnügte Ruh, which is like one of the most gorgeous cantata arias ever. That's an Oboe d'Amour. And that's the complete opposite of what you were speaking about with the quick tonguing and the tut-tut sounds that you need to be creating to separate staccato notes. The instrument is just so versatile. So, even though we started this episode with some sort of gentle making fun of the oboe and oboists, it's actually kind of one of the best ones because it has the capacity to be the most beautiful. So I'll close with this. Katharina Verhaar from the video said there are some really wonderful arias for oboe. My personal theory is it was Bach's favorite instrument. I think that might not be that far off. Maybe violin, maybe viola, but maybe oboe.
Is Bach the oboe player of composers?
I think Bach is the organ.
Yeah.
Bach is the organist of composers and of organists. But, you know, he certainly knows how to tug at the heartstrings with those oboe arias. And then again, he knows how to use them exactly correctly orchestrationally in something like this, the Brandenburg Concerto No. 1.
And now here is Alex's moment. If these two trios of the Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 from this recording by the Netherlands Bach Society have inspired you to hear the rest of this concerto and the other 5 Brandenburg concertos and other Bach music, please see the link in the episode description to get to their channel and to this recording. Also, Alex, I found a really fun YouTube short, which was probably a TikTok, which is of a horn player playing these 3 parts himself. It's a video of Scott Legger horn is the username, and he plays on a modern instrument, so some advantage there, but still, he plays all 3 parts, including the oboe part, on the horn.
Nice.
And the oboe part does have one note even higher. It's got a G in there, a concert G, which for him is a high D on the horn, which is a note that I have never played on that instrument. So it's really impressive.
There are a few who can.
Yeah. It's impressive little bit of horn playing and recording, and it's panned really well, so you can hear all three parts, and you can hear the high notes kind of switching between the first horn and the second horn. It's really cool.
Nice. Yeah, you got to send me that. So we'll link that in the episode description too. Yeah. All right, Christian, what's up next?
Well, we have one last thing to do with this Brandenburg Concerto. Yes, we're still in this mini-series, and we have one last thing, and that's the Polonaise. It is another middle section of this minuet, and we'll talk about it next week.
Until next time, enjoy those oboes. Enjoy those moments.